Ah, all right. What is your take on ego?
I think ego is split into two sections. You have passive ego, which is
Okay.
your self-conscious. Everybody has an ego, regardless if you say you don't or not. Your passive ego is always going to be there, where you're like, okay, I'm going to make this decision because it's for me, which is, valid and fair. So I don't think that's why anybody talks about passive ego, but the more talked about perception of ego is outward displaying ego, where you decide, yo, I'm gonna outwardly say fuck everybody because I have some sort of privilege that puts me at an advantage above somebody, and that's when people start to be like, "Oh, ego is a bad word. Like, ego is a word that would be used in a negative connotation." Where no, I talk to my ego every day. Like, I conflict my ego every day, just as everybody else does. It's just what you do with your ego and how you portray that is more of the defining factor. So I think ego is an inherently good thing that is turned bad by man, for sure.
I like that take. That's a W take,
Yes.
actually. I like that take. What about Because I remember back when we were in high school, you talked about the healthy and unhealthy ego. What do you think the difference is there? Is that how man handles the passive and unpassive?
Yeah, I mean, just as you have a healthy mental state and an unhealthy mental state, a healthy physical state, unhealthy physical state, you can have a healthy ego and a very unhealthy ego. And it's very obvious and clear when somebody has a very unhealthy ego because the obvious things start to get portrayed. People start to talk loud, talk about things that don't matter, and put their opinion into things that, sometimes it shouldn't be said. Uh, but it's really hard to spot somebody with a good ego because they try their best to suppress their ego and live and coincide with other egos, which is, you know, the beauty of friendship and the beauty of love is just never said like that. And ego is always used in that negative connotation that I'm talking about. And it's not fair. It's a good word. I think ego is a very big personification of man. So just talk about it. Let's talk about ego.
I agree. Um, I agree with everything that was said. I think that everyone's born naturally with ego. One of the best conversations I had with one of the guys at work was I asked him if he thought that men had more ego than women, and he kind of just looked at me. He was like, "It doesn't matter. Like we're
Yeah.
both born inherently with the same amount of ego. It's just
Yeah.
boys are louder, so you're gonna hear it a lot more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that one has more than the other. It's just outwardly guys are more stupid when it comes to it. You know? And I agree. I agree with that take. But I do think that there's no point in sitting here and denying like that you're egoless. You know what I mean? Because I don't think
Yeah.
it's something that you can just innately kill. It's something that exists within all of us,
Yeah.
and you can only really learn certain methods to kind of keep it under control, like you said. You know what I mean?
Facts.
There's people that do take a conscious state of mind and paying attention to what they do, the bad habits that they've accumulated over the years from people close to them that kind of
Mm,
stroke their ego in a negative direction. And an ego that goes in a negative direction is stroked like to the max. You know what I mean?
mm,
Because that's how you end up, how you were just saying, where you're constantly loud, giving your opinion. And it's not to say you should never talk, because I've also been down that route before.
mm.
But it's just like being conscious and being able to convey what you're feeling inside and kind of internalize and then speak instead of just talking loudly right away. You know what I mean?
I agree. So one really interesting dynamic that I see between the male and female ego, right, is that it's very clear that the ego that a man possesses can be very easily influenced by their pride, which is why a man's ego, when they're in an unhealthy state, is reflected so much more. That's because our pride also is a big factor of how our ego is, perceived, channeled, and also outwardly expressed. So when a woman gets into a position where her ego is now starting to take over, you see her start to actually talk a lot less to people, where these egotistical girls that, like, in high school, the pretty girls, I guess you could say, you will easily see that they have an ego by the little amount of people that they talk to. They have their small circle, and that's not a bad thing. Having a small circle is good, but when you have a small circle of people that only there to I guess the best way to explain is glaze you. If you have a
Stroke your ego.
yeah,
That's it.
exactly. It's just that's a lot more of a female trait, especially because women look for affection a lot more than men, or a lot more outwardly than men, I'd say. So yeah, the dynamic is, although you don't see women's egos as much as you do men's, that doesn't mean anything. You know, women also have an ego that can sometimes get really, really, really pressing in society, and we get some women that I guess you could point out in your life that you're like, wow, that girl has a big ego and she needs to relax. It happens with everybody. Everybody goes through a phase where their ego will get inflamed,
Yeah, I agree.
and they want to feel like they have something to prove, which is, good, but I don't think your ego, it should be a catalyst to you wanting to improve, or you wanting to prove that you have improved. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said about just like the two gender differences. You know what I mean? You just talked about how women's ego tends to shine more when they're quiet, whereas on the opposite side, men's ego tends to spend more when they speak loud.
Mm,
And I feel like that's why men tend to be more perceived as ego fueled creatures, because
yeah.
or the more ego fueled gender, I should say, because they're always talking loud. You know, you don't walk into a room and hear a woman yapping most of the time, like in an outwardly like ego type of way.
Mhm.
They're more like chill, more like a calm demeanor.
Yeah.
Whereas like when you walk into a gym, there's always going to be a guy, whatever you do, outwardly just trying to admit that they're the best of themselves. And it gets to a point where like you wonder, is this person trying to prove this to us, or are they trying to prove it to themselves?
Yeah, that's again, that's also comes back to pride. Like, pride and ego really do go hand in hand in the male psyche. So when you see prideful men, most of the time their ego is accompanied by it, unless their ego is healthy. And a prideful, humble man is a lot more quiet, and like noticeably more quiet
Yeah, I agree.
than a prideful, egotistical man. It's just like, it's common sense at that point, where it's just like, hey, my pride is my. I'm like, there's times where I can put my pride aside because my ego's not forcing me to choose myself. You know what I mean? It's just, it's cause and effect. It is, yeah.
I agree. And I remember, without getting into like the specifics of it, that conversation we had like a week or two ago when we had to figure out what to do, and it really just came down to like an honest to god conversation of like, yeah, we were talking, and we both agreed that the person shouldn't make a decision. But then it came to a point in my mind where I'm like, all right, you know, on paper this looks like the right thing to do to benefit us and like what we're trying to accomplish. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But then it gets to a point where I'm texting you and you're like, okay, well now you need to ask this person what do they want to accomplish.
yeah,
And it gets to a point where like I'm reading the text and I'm like, all right, now it comes to a point where there's a fourth person entering the conversation, because it was me, you, and the other person, but now my own ego is entering the conversation.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And that's something that I need to consult, like how you just said, on a daily basis, where it's like, all right, I'm making these decisions, and the decisions involve other people, but am I really doing this for the betterment of everyone mutually, or am I just doing this for the betterment of myself? And I think that in that moment, it was like, all right, I'm talking to myself, but I'm also talking to my ego, because that's always gonna be in the conversation, because
yeah,
it's just a part of who we are. So like for me, when I'm talking to someone, whether it be like how we're talking to each other right now, like there's three people in this conversation. It's me, you, and my ego.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And that ego is kind of like the dividing factor between me and you if I let it be.
yeah.
And
I
I think
agree.
that that night that we both did a very good job of not letting that ego be a dividing factor between me, you, and the person that we're trying to give advice. You
I
know what I
agree.
mean?
And yeah, it's just not fair if you, like, your intentions. So if you truly know, like, hey, this is like the best outcome for the person that I'm trying to, be better for, or better inherently, then I'm not gonna make a decision that will only benefit me. It's clear. And I understand that this person has their own ego and has their own cares, has their own life, you know, and I'm not gonna be the deciding factor. Although I would love to see the option that we both would want to see. You know what I mean? I would love to see that, because then it just means I get to, do more opportunities come up. This person benefits greatly from this decision, but at the end of the day, what does the person want to do? And if the person wants to do this, the thing that I'm advising them not to do, then That's their decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
and
I'm
as long
not.
as it's not harmful, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Because if it was a harmful thing, then it'd be a thing of like, all right,
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
isn't just my ego. This is more of like a
Moral.
protection kind of thing.
It's
It's a
your moral.
morally right
Yeah,
thing to do, you
yeah,
know. And I think that a lot of people actually like while speaking on ego, I think ego and moral kind of go hand in hand because I think ego shuts down moral most of the time.
yeah. Ego and moral will. Sorry, ego and moral will clash, while pride and
Yeah,
ego will coexist a lot easier.
yeah,
And it's not very often where you'll see somebody's pride clash with their ego, but it's super common to see people's ego clash with their morality.
yeah.
And if you're like quote unquote normal human being and you know,
A weirdo.
you're not disabled in any way, you're gonna make the right decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that like even when ego and moral do go hand in hand, sometimes it kind of does get too far. You know,
Yeah.
like when I think of it of like ego and moral going hand in hand, I think of like last year when we had that situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like during that moment, obviously like my morals were in the right place because I'm looking at it from a perspective of like, all right, like I'm justifying this because I'm not just doing this for myself at
Mm,
all. You know, I'm doing this for my friend that I've known since I was like 2 years old, and
mm,
someone's trying to mess with him. So that's the justifiable part of it. But
mm.
then it gets to a point where like even though morally I'm doing the right thing, then ego comes into play where you're taking it too far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
And like when ego comes into play, like you feel that pull. You know, it's
yeah,
like it's like being an alcoholic. I'd imagine. You know,
yeah,
where like the reason people can't really get off of alcohol or stop drinking alcohol is because they can't imagine life without it. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And it's like we can't imagine life without our ego because we can't live life without our ego. That's what drives us to be like who we are internally. That's what drives
yeah,
us to be our best self. But it's that negative side of it when that pull happens where it's like, all right, even when this does go with my morals, now I'm still taking it too far, you know?
yeah. I think your ego is just super influential in your psyche. So when your morals are starting to clash with your ego, your brain either has two options. It has either A, it learns to coexist with each other. So your ego and your morality have a good balance, and your ego will shut off in the times where you need to be morally correct, and vice versa.
I agree.
But you also have choice B, where it's like you let your ego take over. You let your ego now dictate your morals, and your ego basically corrupts your moral compass, and that's where people start to really spiral. Which is why alcoholics will spiral down alcohol when they're like, I can't imagine my life without the alcohol, and they feel that pull. Most people will be like, all right, I see alcohol is fucking up my life, so I'm not gonna drink alcohol. You know what I mean? It's just again like when it comes to the human psyche, I think it's just super like it's not black and white at all, but
Yeah,
there are two sides to the coin only, and it's like either you do this or you do that, and there's no other choice. There will always be like a one and a two. So just don't let your ego corrupt you. That's all I have to say. Your ego can be a super super strong tool.
yeah,
And if you learn how to manipulate your ego into ways that benefit you and the people around you, that's when you start to learn how to grow as a person super efficiently, where you'll just like see the steps ahead of you and just you'll keep walking. But until then, like you're gonna have trouble. Yeah. But I think a good place to start if anybody's like in a place of needing to change, it's to change your ego and change your morals, and then you'll see things in your life start to pick up in the right direction for sure.
I agree. I think that ego at the end of the day is can be a form of self-discovery if you use it right.
Yeah,
And I
for
and I
sure.
think that it can also be viewed as like a self-love. But then it comes to a point of like some people will say self-love and then hurt others, you know what I mean,
Mm,
in the name of that own self-love. And I
mm,
think that like what becomes the addiction, the kind of like alcohol parallel kind of addiction
mm.
and diving deeper into it is when you have moments like those, right, where like your morals and your ego go hand in hand, you kind of like spiral downward. Like when that whole thing happened, the whole next day was just a huge ego boost, you know?
Yeah,
And an ego boost can be really scary because now you understand that you have power, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
You're like, okay, I'm diving deep into this. I have the power, but like, what am I going to do with this power? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Whereas, like, I think that being morally correct can be the same way, but it's just not as enticing because our morals come from ourselves, yes, but like most of the time they come from like an external factor of like the people around us and the
Yeah, yeah,
decisions that you're making.
yeah. Your
Whereas
morals.
like
Yeah,
your ego kind of comes from the decisions you're making for yourself, you know?
yeah,
And that's why it's bad when your ego and morals go hand in hand because you can justify it, but then it comes to a point of again, like this is a huge ego boost. I know I made a mistake, but it still just feels so good, you know? And
yeah,
it's kind of like that alcohol parallelism where you don't really know how to live without it or live with it in a healthy way.
yeah. There's experience that I've had in life that like, I can't talk about,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
but you know, I've like I've done things and like and I guess looked back on them and be like, wow, I really went through an ego death in that moment. And like when you first experience ego death, you're in such like a catatonic state. Like
I agree.
you genuinely like you become such a paralyzed person, and without your ego, you genuinely cannot function. You cannot function. So once you get that ego death, I think it's a big switch that flips in your mind, because that's like, just imagine you died and you got resurrected the next day. You would do so much more with your life because you realize how fast your life can really get taken. And it's the same way with your ego. Your ego can get crushed so fast by the smallest shit. Truly, if it really bothers you that much, your ego can crash so hard. So once you experience that, it's like, wow, I can't ever let that happen again. And the people that end up going down the wrong path are the people that experience ego death and think the best way to recoup from that is to dump a bunch of serotonin and a bunch of dopamine by doing stupid shit. And now their ego's back up, and then that's where you create that roller coaster effect. And everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, just can't be stupid. Like it's a very clear sign that like you need to change if you experience ego death. It's a very clear sign.
Yeah, I agree. I've only ever really experienced like one moment of that, maybe because like I'm someone that's like really honest with myself and I reflect on a daily basis. And it's like I am a very ego driven person, you know?
Yeah,
A lot of the things that I do, even when it's for other people, is majority for myself. Because at the end of the day, like we're human. We most of the time we're
yeah,
not gonna do things for other people that don't benefit ourselves in some type of way either.
yeah,
Whether it be physically, materialistically, or emotionally wise. And for me, most of those moments just happen to be emotionally wise. That's why I don't really expect anything out of it because it's like, all right, I already got the satisfaction of my emotions out of it, you know?
yeah,
But I think like for me, I think the other day was honestly the first time that I can say like I've experienced an ego death because I went to work the next day and I remember just feeling like not like I wasn't myself, but I was just there and I was kind of just like letting whatever was happening in life just happen to me and kind of just fill me up emotionally, you
yeah.
know?
But
And I think that in those moments it's really important to decide what you're gonna do in the moment because that's what's gonna decide what's gonna fill you up. Because when you have an ego death, you're empty, right? Like your ego is yourself.
mm,
So when your ego dies, you're kind of losing a sense of yourself. And the next day or like the next moments are really important because when you're empty, you can fill yourself up whatever you want with, you know?
yeah. To like, it's super easy for me to think about ego in a sense of like your I guess your guard. Like
Yeah,
uh, without your like truly, if you've been in a position where you like have no ego, and I've been in that position
yeah,
before,
me
so
too.
that's why like I know it's so easy to like think about, but it's so hard to convey because it's such a unique experience in life where you truly have no ego, and you're like, wow, I don't care. Like I don't care. Those moments are so frightening because you won't even know who you are in like at that time.
Yeah,
And when you come back from that, you're like, wow, like somebody else was in my body at that point. That
yeah,
wasn't even me. Like it was a different vessel. So when your ego is high and you have a good sense of ego, it's really hard to lose it because those things don't affect you anymore. So just when you're in those moments, you just gotta like lock it. Like you really do have to lock in.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. You're right. You can fill it up with whatever you want, but there's at the end of the day, there's a good and there's a bad.
Yeah, and it's up to you what you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Like for me in the moment, like I recognized it and I was like, all right, like I have to go out of my way to kind of like try to do a lot of positive. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Because you don't want to sit there and feel like, yo, I'm losing my sense of identity or a part of me because that's what your ego is, and just do a lot of BS because you feel like nothing matters. You know what I mean? In that moment, I was like, all right, I'm locking in. Nothing really matters, but that's not an excuse to do bad things. You know what I mean? And so,
facts.
like in that moment, instead, like someone came in and talked to him, made my day, and I just moved on with it. You know what I mean? I regained a sense of self. I would say probably like for a week or two, I felt like that, and then I looked back and I was like, wow, a lot of good things happened to me within the past 2 weeks because I made them happen. I recreated myself into a better version of what I already was after that ego death. You know what I mean? But it's because I constantly chose that. At any moment when someone asked me for help, I could have just walked by and felt like it didn't matter, and I could have looked back on it and regretted it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
But
Yeah, your ego doesn't have the farthest vision. You know what I mean? Your
yeah,
ego is very past and present.
and present. Yeah, I was just about to say it's very moment to moment orientated in
Yeah,
moments like those. Yeah, I agree.
yeah. You can only gain ego from the things that are happening to you right now or the things that have happened to you. But
Yeah,
you can never dictate your ego based off of the things that are to come, which is why it's super important in those times where you have an ego death that you do go out and make shit happen because then you look back on it and I'm like, wow, I feel good because I did good. And
facts.
that's exactly what you went through. It's just it's as easy as that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's a lot of that is due to your moral compass. You know what I mean? Your moral compass now guiding you when you're not there. And it comes from your experiences and your family. So
yeah. I think your moral compass is very much like, I wouldn't say opposite orientated to your ego death or your ego in general, but it's very much based on the past, present, and future. You know, because
yeah,
I think that you build your moral compass mainly on the past and the future.
yeah,
Honestly, because there's times where I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, like I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? Like the
yeah.
other day, I was driving to a different job, and I was thinking back on a different job about something I did, and I told someone like something asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I was like, damn, I need to text this person. And I texted them. I just figured solved it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And that in that moment, it doesn't really matter to me personally what that person responds with. I've already done the right thing. You know,
yeah,
whether that person responds with no, fuck you, or oh, okay, cool, and appreciates it to the max, it's like I'm already doing the right thing. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And I think that I was someone in the past when it came to my moral compass, and I think my ego invaded my moral compass in a sense of I would do things like that just to hear nice things back in the moment. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And your moral compass isn't something that's very developed on the present. You know, that's your ego talking in the present.
yeah,
So like when I'm living my life now, and I didn't realize it until only a couple of months ago, but I'm doing things like that. And I'm like, all right, like I'm doing good for other people, and other people are worried about paying me back in a sense. But it's like I'm not even concerned about that. I'm more just concerned about the person that I'm building towards in the future and how this is going to affect me morally. You know what I
word.
mean? And I think that that is, in a sense, the complete opposite of ego, because ego is very present and past orientated, whereas your moral compass, which is the good side of you, the good part of your ego, and what's going to build a good ego for the future, is very much orientated on the future instead of the past and the present.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, bro, it's 7:15. You gotta go to Texas.
yeah, I know.
Good talk, bro.
That was a W.
Yeah.
Ah.